I had pneumonia for 9 months. I was so sick, like really sick. So I basically did no marketing for 9 months. And then I had this big revenue dip. And as soon as I was better again and like ready to go, I needed sales quickly. I needed to reinvigorate my audience. I need to invite new people in. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do to just bring people in? And the obvious thing for me was get booked on podcasts, create a private podcast to invite people into, and then invite people to work with me through emails once they're in.
Welcome back to another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast. I think you're going to love this episode today. Today we're talking to Natalie Koussa, Podcast Tour Specialist, and she's going to talk about how she generated 5 figures in sales with less than 50 listeners. Natalie, so excited to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Love it. Why don't we start out by you telling us a little bit about your business, like your business model, what you do, who you do it for? I think that'll help set the stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So yeah, I'm all about podcast guesting. I have 2 main offers. One is a group program. It's called the Speakeasy. Helps you speak on podcasts, book out a podcast tour that books out your business. And I also do done for you podcast guest tours where I do absolutely everything. We get together, we do the strategy and positioning together, and then I do all of the outreach, all of the bookings management, and all of the supporting you with the preparation. So you turn up confident, charismatic, and everything is easy breezy.
Oh, I love this. I know.
I love the names of her stuff, by the way.
Yes.
Like,
Thank
it's
you.
so good.
The best.
Yeah.
I love this. Okay, talk to us a little bit about how you're specifically using private podcasts in your marketing or in the flow of how you're attracting and converting clients.
Yeah, so at the moment, I have a private podcast called Poddam, and it's the main thing that I'm offering at the end of speaking on podcasts. So last year, I had pneumonia for 9 months. I was so sick, like really sick. And all I could do in my business was serve my existing clients. So I basically did no marketing for 9 months. Like you can imagine how that went.
Mm.
So I had this, it was fine for a few months. And then I had this big revenue dip. And I needed to just, as soon as I was better again and like ready to go, I needed sales quickly. I needed to get things moving. I needed to reinvigorate my audience. I need to invite new people in. And right at the beginning of my business, I'd had a private podcast that I loved. You know, listeners loved it. It converted really well. I only pulled it down because my positioning changed. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do to just bring people in? And the obvious thing for me was get booked on podcasts, create a private podcast to invite people into, and then invite people to work with me through emails once they're in. So that's what I've been up to over the last few months.
Awesome. Oh my
Such
goodness.
a good, what I love about this, it comes up every once in a while, this idea of guesting on public podcasts, and it's cool, but then a lot of people don't have a call to action, or they're sending to the people to a freebie that like doesn't make sense for what they're speaking on. And what we love at Hello Audio as a guest of a podcast, if you link to a private podcast, you're literally staying within the same vibe, right? Like you're talking to people who are in a podcast player already, clearly like listening to audio. And then you're like, hey, I can help you. Just listen to this other podcast and it's private and secret and we can connect over there. And I bet that is probably such an important reason why it converts so well, right? And so let's dive into this a little bit. Okay, so the strategy, you guest on podcasts and you drop a call to action. Does it have a super long lead, like a landing page? Is it short? What are you doing on that page to get people to convert for that?
Oh my God, Lindsay, I just keep things simple. Just
Good.
give the
I
people
love it.
what they
Love to
want,
hear
you
it.
know?
Yes.
So simple. So one thing I'll say, if you are speaking on podcasts and you want to invite people in, something that works really well is just create a really memorable link. Not everyone is going to be bothered to go to the show notes and click through. So mine is nataliekoussa.com/visible. You know, make it something that your people want. My people want more visibility. So it's just /visible. And then it just takes you to a really simple landing page. There's 3 episodes in the private podcast. It says what they are. It says sign up here. I'll send it to you. That's it. So
Good. I love it. Good. I love that tip too. It's so true with the links. Like we also have affiliates who share Hello Audio like verbally. And it's like, if you can just make it, yes, you can provide the link, but if you could just make it something that people can remember, it's way more likely to be Googled. Even if they don't even spell the name right, there's usually a way that, Google can figure it out. So that's a great hot tip. Okay, cool. So let's talk about the structure of these episodes and why you decided to make it a certain way. Like we don't have to get into like details of whatever, but yeah, tell us about a little bit about the structure of the episodes and the name of it and what you're doing with that podcast.
Yeah. So one of the things that I work with my clients on a lot is their opt-ins, from their podcast tour, what are we inviting people into? And what I've seen, I know we've all been seeing shifts in buyer behavior, especially since the end of the pandemic and to now. But what I'm seeing really specifically with opt-ins, it used to be give them a quick win and then,
Mm.
and then kind of offer them the bigger piece. What I'm seeing is that still works really well when you're teaching. So that works well for my group program. People want to know that you can teach them something that works. They want to get a sense of your teaching style. They want to try it out, actually see results and then come into work with you. But what's working really well for done for you or coaching or something where there's not a teaching element in quite the same way is sharing your point of view. So really becoming known for your philosophy, your point of view, your one of a kind concept, the way that you do the thing that you do. And that's how, I call it turning your message into a movement. Like it's the way that only you can do your thing. So Pod Damn, my private podcast, needs to work for two completely different audiences. It needs to work for my done for you clients and it needs to work for my group program client. And they're really different people. They're at different stages of business. They need different things. So what I decided to do, and this was a total gamble, but it paid off, is make Pod Damn speaking directly to my done for you clients. They're typically more experienced. They've been in the game for longer. They're just a different kind of client. So Pod Damn is very much leading with my point of view. It's 3 episodes and it really goes hard on my really central philosophy, which is that speaking on podcast is not just PR. If you're
Mhm.
using speaking on podcast as PR, great, I'll do that for you, but you're missing sales. Really, if you're in, the kind of industry that almost all your listeners will be in, I imagine, you want speaking on podcasts to be as close to an end-to-end sales funnel as you can make it. So the 3 episodes are talking about why that's the case, some examples, how to do it, my philosophy on it. And what I've seen is that for my done for you clients, there's a really clear, super simple, super effective funnel, which is they hear me speaking on a podcast, or sometimes they get referred to me. They sign up for Poddam. They listen only to the first episode, and then they read a couple of emails and then book a sales call. It's just working like clockwork at the moment. And so the people that I take as sales directly from the private podcast are literally only the people that mention the private podcast in their sales call. If they don't mention it, I kind of don't count them as sales from the private podcast. So that's my done for you. And then for my group offer people, they typically listen to more of the episode. They typically listen to 2 or 3 of the episodes. And then I offer them a training as part of my launch strategy. And typically people that go in to buy the group offer have both. So they listen to the private pod and they either come live or they watch the replay, doesn't seem to matter, and then join the group offer. So it's really different buying behavior.
This is great. You make a couple of really important points that I want to highlight for folks that are listening. And first, it's when you do have two different buyer personas, where in this case, the folks that are ready for done for you services, like you said, they're probably at a different place in business. They may have a different revenue point in their business. They may have a different perceived need, right? That they're just looking to outsource this or looking for someone else. And then you've got the other group who still want the outcome, and yet they're going to implement it in a different way, whether it's a budgeting thing or whether it's just a risk tolerance thing. They're just in a different place. But I love what you said about the choice you made about using Poddam as the content is going to be geared toward that first audience, that done for you. And it's not because you're excluding the group program folks, it's really aspirational. Both sets of audiences want the same outcome. It's just going to be the vehicle that they use to get it. And so, you sharing the content that you did in terms of your philosophy and ultimately what you believe they should be doing and why it works and giving them that context, it does speak to both audiences. It just is, and it converts both audiences. And to your point, the group program folks, the folks that are really geared toward that group program, are likely to consume more of that content and really dive in a little bit deeper because they're not looking to outsource it. They're looking to do it themselves. So they are wanting clarity. They want to make sure they understand the information so that they have a higher, success rate or whatever that looks like. And I think that's important for anyone that does have multiple avatars or multiple buyer personas, is to really look at what is that common ground that you can establish between both sets. And I think you did a great job. And I think you made the right choice because it's aspirational content for those, even if you're not ready to outsource, it's still the same content. So I love what you did there as well. A lot of people get hung up on that. I don't think it has to be as difficult as sometimes we make it.
Yeah, and for me, I just wanted one opt-in offer. I
Yes.
didn't want to because you never fully know. You can have a really educated guess who the listeners for a podcast are, but you never fully know. There are tons of people that love listening to super aspirational podcasts. I'm one of them. I didn't want to exclude anybody. I wanted something that would be super simple, invite everybody in, but then, you kind of just do a little bit of extra nurturing and extra kind of teaching and let people try before they buy for the group offer.
Awesome. I love this. This is great on so many levels. Now, I'm curious. I love the fact also that you've kept it simple. And so I'm curious if you are looking at data on the back end to see who's listening, or if you're just organically letting it happen and the sales calls. And the reason I'm asking is because we do have some listeners with similar business models, or similar Hello Audio users with similar business models, who will use our super listener score. So that's our lead scoring tool in Hello Audio. And they look to see who's consuming it the fastest, or the most content. And then they're using that to follow up or to see which listeners are like their hottest lead. And that's not necessary. It sounds like maybe you're just kind of keeping it simple and it's organically happening and working really well.
Yeah, and also, so I'm not doing that. I don't think my done for you clients that have come in through that funnel would show up as super listeners, because they're literally listening to one episode and and then booking a sales call.
Right
And,
away.
and I think that's
Love
the
that.
power of it, that they don't need tons of episodes. They don't need lots of time. They're just wanting to understand. For them, I think they want to understand, do I understand the industry? Can I get them booked out bigger podcasts than they would be able to do themselves? Would I be a great ambassador for their brand? So listening to one episode for them seems to be plenty. So I don't think they'd show up on their super listener score.
And you make a great point, because if you think about where your ideal buyers are coming in to the funnel, they have they have needs, they have beliefs that they need to have in order to be most likely to buy, and they have some underlying fears. And those fears are directly related to what you talk about, probably in episode 1. Are you the person, right? Can she get me the results that I'm looking for? And once they have those kind of fears or needs feel like they're met or relieved, or in some way, then they're a lot more likely to book that call, because the call is a conversion point. And so for anyone, wondering what content to put in your episodes, as long as you're addressing the needs that your people believe they have and the underlying fears that might prevent them or cause some hesitation or some friction in order for them to take that action, in this case, book a sales conversation, that's the content. I mean, that's ultimately what they need to hear to be most likely to take that next step. And it sounds like the fact that you can do that in one episode, I think, is fantastic. And I love that it's working. I'm curious what feedback you've received from folks. Granted, this is all podcast related, so I'm sure you're not getting anyone that isn't familiar with podcasts. But has anyone given you feedback on you using a private podcast to do this?
Just that they love it. I get lots of people saying to me, either on sales calls or when they join my program, I already feel like I know you. I don't really have any questions. So it's just really intimate, I think, as an experience that they get a sense of who I am and how I think. And yeah, so I already feel like I know you is one. And then for the group program in particular, so they listen to 3 episodes and they read more emails. They kind of stay on my list a little bit longer before they join the group offer. But they, in their onboarding form, and I'm getting this more and more recently, are saying things like, I just knew exactly what I was buying before I came in. I feel so confident. I know this is my best next move. I know this is the right timing. I know how to know that from what's going on in my business. Like all of that kind of stuff, which I've really, again, with the kind of changing buyer behavior, I only want clients that really are ready to create the results that we're offering and to go all in and to feel, I was going to say confident, but confident enough. You don't have to feel you can create that later, right? But confident enough in me, in the curriculum, in the portal, in the community they're going to be part of, that they're like, yeah, of course, this is, right for me now. So I'm hearing that more and more. And I think lots of that, yeah, sure. Most people find me from speaking on other people's podcasts. That definitely help. There's a real depth of relationship that you create. But I think the private podcast just gives them even more of that kind of relationship and safety and certainty. I mean, sales basically is answering, yeah, but will it work for me? At the heart of it, that's all sales is. They're like all these individual people with similar needs and desires, but something slightly different that makes them individual, that makes their business individual. So getting better and better at that, that's where these really high conversion rates come from, is knowing your people inside out, knocking out their hesitations before they've even had a chance to ask them, and also knocking out the people that, not knocking them out, but like excluding, I don't mean like excluding the
So
people
violent.
that, yeah, you know what I mean? I might sound softly spoken, but no, but like excluding the people that aren't ready yet, or that it wouldn't be a good fit for, or who don't like your teaching style, or just aren't going to be great clients, aren't actually going to get what they want from you.
Do you find that having the private podcast maybe makes the sales conversation easier or more enjoyable? I know we have a lot of folks that do like one-on-one sales conversations, and not everyone loves them. That's not everyone's favorite part of their business. I'm curious what you think about, does the private podcast affect your experience with that?
I think it's a combination of my sales page is really dialed in, so people know exactly what they're expecting. They've already typically heard me on at least one kind of public podcast and then one episode of the private podcast. And so by the time, I mean, I love sales calls, mainly because I know that if they've booked a sales call, they're becoming a client, as long as they're a good fit. Because people come to the sales call with a couple of questions about how will this work for me specifically? Like this thing's going on in my business, or how does this bit of the process work? Or what if this particular scenario happens? And then they're like, great, okay, let's go.
Okay, so I know you help people with their opt-in. So all the folks that you work with, when you're helping them get booked on, they're guesting on other people's podcasts. Do you recommend that they also have a private podcast in some cases as an opt-in?
In lots of cases, yeah. If they want one, yeah. Because if it's like what Lindsay was saying at the beginning, right? Just give the people what they want. If we know that people that listen to podcasts are really loyal listeners and they enjoy listening to podcasts and it, kind of woven into their day, like they're listening, walking the dog or picking the kids up from school or folding the laundry, or like it's all the mundane bits of the day where we listen to podcasts. So it becomes a habit, isn't it, that we kind of really look forward to. So yeah, if for all of my clients, if they enjoy speaking, which they typically do because they want to speak on podcasts, then recording a private podcast is a really obvious next step for them.
And so it's so funny. I always have these like aha moments, right? We're like 50-ish episodes in, like of case studies and stuff. And we've been doing this for a few years. And it's funny because I'm like, it's so obvious to me that public podcast listeners have that habit built why wouldn't they want to listen to a private podcast? Literally every public podcast host should have that as a call to action. Like there shouldn't be any anything else. There should not be a blog post you're linking to. There should not be a video series. Like it needs to be a private podcast and selling whatever you sell because and I think I'm just connecting the dots because what I typically separated those things when I go on public podcasts and talk about Hello Audio and why it's powerful, we talk about why podcast listening opens up more space for your listener, for your audience to like let you in. And it's already too crowded. They only have so many days in front of their computer. They only have so many minutes in front of their phone where they can disconnect because that even is like going less and less. Like I don't love when I'm on it looking and my toddler's in front of me, like not ideal. Like I have to stop that. Right. And so this idea that I only have some hours, if I'm an avid podcast listener and I listen to someone's show every single week, that means it has a space on my calendar, maybe not a space on my calendar, but a space in my day when I'm brushing my teeth, when I'm doing whatever, that like I've earmarked for something. And if you're not capitalizing on that earmark time, um, bananas, like it's bananas. We are seeing for Hello Audio, yeah, there's some listeners that aren't avid podcast listeners that still jump in and get it. And then they're like, whoa. And then, their whole feed is that person's content, right? That Hello Audio user's content because they have their courses, they have their programs, they have their opt-ins and all that stuff. But I don't know why it was like the way you said it, or maybe because we're going so deep on like lead magnets tied to public podcasts that I was just like, how is this not like what you have to be doing? And then I'm like, okay, we don't have one. It's always the moment too where I'm like, we do our success
But we
stories.
do.
Yeah, but we don't plug it. A. B, I know it's our own show and there is something about guesting. And we typically, when I guest, I usually do success stories podcast. But, Nora and I have been talking about it. Like it's success stories is pretty close to what we're doing here. So like we are working on like a new lead magnet ourselves. But if just thinking about it from that perspective of like, if we dropped it every episode, what would be the thing that we would drop? And duh, like people who are binging this stuff right now, they're going to be binging whatever else we like have for them. And a lot of our listeners are users already, but even still, I think a lot of people listen to the show to get ideas before they bite the bullet and do it. And so, anyways, there's my brain going like all these different directions. But yeah, that connection of that habit piece tied to public podcast is like literally everything.
Yeah. It's how I started going to the gym again. I
Hmm.
totally dropped off going to the gym. Well, I was ill, as I said, but I just did not go for the gym. You know what it's like when you've not been for months and months, and just the thought of it is, oh my God, it's going to be so hard. I'm going to suck. It's just, oh, you have to like get over that. So that's what I'm
Yeah,
doing.
I get
get
to
up in the
listen to my
morning.
favorite show. Yeah.
I line up something in the day before that I want to listen to. So I don't think, oh my God, I'm going to the gym. I think, great, I get to listen to whatever. Yeah.
And millions of other people are doing that too. So I
Yep.
think that's really important to highlight. And I know we've had this stat where I don't remember who did this study, but they said that more people are listening to podcasts than they are watching Netflix. And
Oh
so
yeah,
there
an
are.
hour.
I mean,
No way.
yeah.
Hours consumed. I think it's something like that. It's not like straight more podcast listeners than Netflix watchers. It's hours per day or time spent per week on average. Yes, we binge a show, but you know how like you binge a show, you're really into it. You watch 8 episodes of an hour each. Fine. That's 8 weeks of a weekly podcast. And most people just continue where I think on Netflix, people sometimes take breaks. So yeah, there's like some statistic around that. Yeah.
Oh, that's mad.
Yeah, it's crazy how, I mean, millions and millions of people. And it's a great vehicle to reach people where they're already at. And I think that obviously it's what you do is you help people, get on podcasts and guest on podcasts. So you're meeting people where they're already at. Similarly with private podcasts, they're already in those apps. They're already listening to content. They
They know
already have, like
exactly
Lindsay
what to
said, they have
do. Yeah.
routines. Yeah, built around it, whether it's the gym, whether it's other things. I love that. I'm curious if there's a lot of business owners. Once you kind of get started with private podcasts, I feel like it's hard to stop. And I know that Lindsay and I are very biased when it comes to we could private podcast this and we could turn this into a private podcast. I'm curious if you've had ideas about a private podcast, whether it's personal or business, that you've been kind of sitting on or something in the back of your head that you wanted to do. You don't strike me as someone who gets distracted very easily, but I'm curious if you have something in your back pocket that you've been thinking about doing.
No, I think for me, it's the opposite way around that I've always used private podcasts. So I've used them in a few different ways in my business. I've had them as course content, so you don't have to watch the videos. This is my third, I opt-in private podcast. For me, I think I'm doing it completely the opposite way to most people. Now, my idea is, okay, it's time for the public podcast. That's going to be up and
That
going in
was
the
us
next
too.
few weeks.
Same.
Yeah.
But I think most people are do it the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Go public
It's
and then private.
it's
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
what we like to say, not a smart idea. Most of our guests, it's a mix, right? Like some people have been podcasting since before private podcast was even like possible. But I think what's the saying? Yesterday was the best day to start, but today's the next, or whatever. It's like, if you don't have a public podcast yet and you want to get started, cool. But build that audience. So here you are
Right.
going on these tours. You have an email list. You have clients. You have students. That's the type of person that should launch a public podcast, because now they can grow that audience and leverage that initial like listens and downloads. And so we actually recommend, based on what you do, to do it that way. And even as somebody who helps people get on public podcasts, people might be like, well, why doesn't she have a public one? It doesn't matter, because like the reality is you're actually teaching them guesting and not how to make a public podcast. But the idea that you built that's how you get that show to take off. We personally think that's the smart move for sure.
Yeah, thanks, me too. And that I get asked a lot, do, should I speak on podcasts or start my own podcast first? Like, if I'm just going to
Mm,
do one. And I always say the same as you, Lindsay, speak on other people's podcasts, because you're getting directly introduced to all of these engaged listeners that already have all this trust built up with the host. That transfer of trust happen, you're actually growing a business. Whereas if you start your podcast before you've done all that work, you're just pouring all of your effort into growing a podcast. I
yeah.
I wanted to pour all my effort into growing my sales, and then I'll grow the audience afterwards.
It is
So
nice
we
when you
have
have money before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also true.
Oh,
Yes.
we kind of, you know, briefly dropped the number that you said. You had 50 listeners for this show, right? Or for this private podcast, and converted it into 5 figures in sales. I'm
yeah.
curious, like, if there's anything you want to explore on that or share. And then you also just said that you've done a couple of private podcasts as lead magnets. If there's any kind of insight you have around what you've learned. I know we focused really on kind of the private podcast that you use to convert people off of a show, but if you want to share a little bit about some of the numbers of all of them, or what kind of strategies or insights you gain from running 3, because I think a lot of people are scared to launch that first one and they don't know which one to do or how to decide. And now that you've had 3 under your belt, there might be something magical in there.
Yeah, sure. So the very first one, I don't have any stats for at all. I just wasn't paying attention to that. It was just something that I kind of did just as an experiment and then put it out there. And then it was working, quote unquote, but I couldn't tell you how. Do you know, I haven't got any numbers at all. And then that got pulled down when I changed my positioning. Um, the middle opt-in that I had was amazing for, it was called Small Audience, Big Influence. And people just loved the positioning of it. And so it was really popular. And I did a really good job of like pre-selling it before it was ready. I mean, it was free, but kind of hyping people before it was ready. Lots of people came in, but then I've done a lot of repositioning, it turns out. But that was going to lead into an offer that I actually decided to discontinue. So that kind of ended up leading nowhere directly. But I am seeing people, it's all like roughly, they've always worked in roughly the same thing, right? So I am seeing that people that did join that are coming through with clients. But this one, I think I've just wrapped up all of the experience of the first 2. So you two said you said you wanted to get really geeky. I'll have the numbers and stuff. So I'll pull the numbers for you. So it's had a really small number of signups, this one. It's only had just over 100 signups, but it's got 6% conversion, which means it's been live for not quite 4 months now. It's made just over 35K in sales.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I think a person listening would be like, yes, please. I'm
Yeah.
like,
See what I
yes,
mean? If I
please.
just keep it simple.
Yeah.
You don't need tons of people. You just need super dialed in messaging, really good positioning, know your people. give them what they want, and then invite them into something really valuable.
And
And
I
have the
want to
results to show
Yeah,
for it, like on the
totally.
other end
absolutely,
of the, yeah.
and you seem happy and not burned out. Like let's mention that because it's not always easy to generate like that amount of sales and still feel like you're excited about it. There's a lot of different ways to launch. There's a lot of different ways to bring people in, and not all of them feel the same.
Yeah, sure. And I've experienced, I wouldn't say like full on burnout in my business, but I've definitely experienced, I can't keep going like this. For
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
I think we
Oh
all
yeah.
have. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's anyone that works for themselves that has like genuinely tried and gone all in and experimented and failed and fallen on your face and, oh my God, when is this going to happen? And then for me, I had this like massive rise and then I got sick and then I just felt so deflated because like I lost all that momentum and all of that. So yeah, I don't want this to sound like, oh my God, I just recorded a private podcast and then it was magic. No, of course it fucking wasn't. There's all of this years of graft that goes into it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep.
yeah, it also does get to be so simple. And yeah, like I'm not burnt out at all now. There's no hint of burnout. I genuinely love what I'm doing. I'm calling in exactly the right client. Yeah, this is what I've been working towards.
Love that.
Oh, I'm so
Christine,
excited for you.
so enjoyable.
Love this
Yeah.
for you. Yeah, I was going to say we definitely love to pull back the curtain and also like you can tell you're an expert. You can tell you've been doing this for a long time. You can tell you know your people. Those are like keys that are needed. And the vehicle of audio in a private podcast can just explode that, right? If you nail that and if you truly understand that. So that's a really good point. And what we like to point out about our users to people, like they're experimenters, they're innovators, they're trying new things. They might not nail it the first time, but they keep going, right? So the fact that you're on your third one is evidence of that. And so there's definitely a lot of gems and insights in there for our folks. All right. So people that are listening are probably thinking about a lead magnet in audio form. That's definitely been a trend, actually, that we've been. It's always funny. We get some interviews back to back, and there's definitely like patterns. So, what advice would you have to somebody who's okay? I know audio, like podcast as a lead magnet, is like the next right move for me. That feels great. What advice would you give them for getting it out there?
I mean, just get on with it. Just do it. Don't overthink it. Record it. Get it out there. It's like part of the beauty of it. But more than that, I would think about what one-of-a-kind concepts do you want to be known for? Like how can you make yourself super memorable, super referable so that people don't just say, oh yeah, that's Lindsay, she does this cool thing. They say, oh my God, that's Lindsay, she does this cool thing in this exact way. Like you need her. Or I heard her telling this story that was just like, it just made me think differently. Or do you know, like something so dialed in. And one of the easiest ways of doing that is thinking about in your day-to-day work with clients, what's the concept that creates massive results? Or that they come back to that concept and they're like, okay, I've been thinking about this one thing and it's made me do this other thing differently. Go all in on sharing that concept. Give it a name if it doesn't have one already. Really think about how can you share it in a way that makes it really memorable. How can you, I don't mean teach it step by step, but use it to introduce results, use it to introduce shifts in belief, use it to introduce new people to your work in a way that really respects them, like really gives them some depth, really kind of trust them to get it. Don't do the whole, I don't know, give them something super basic at the beginning and then work up to it. Like just give them something really good at the beginning. And speaking of a private podcast really helps you do that because you have the time to explain it and make it funny and, just kind of be yourself and meet people where they are with something really, really super valuable.
So true.
Perfect.
I think that's so true. Okay. Do we want to ask our final question that we ask all of our guests? So, the question we ask everyone is if there was a private podcast that had your life's musings, what would it be called?
I love this question. I was really hoping you'd ask me it.
Well, also because you have great names. So
You
by
do
the
have
way,
great names.
No pressure.
No, it is. Well, I think it's a great name. You tell me. It'd be called The Missing Egyptian.
Ooh, I'm
Because
curious.
it's just a nickname that I've had for years and years and years. So my dad's Egyptian, my mum's English. And I don't speak Egyptian. I don't know. And I didn't grow up with my dad. So I'm just English culturally, you know?
Hmm.
And just this one, I don't know, this guy called me the missing Egyptian once and it stuck. And it was just so funny and flippant the way that he said it. And yeah, so it would be the missing Egyptian private podcast.
Oh,
I
I love it.
actually love it.
Exploring
I love
identity and
it.
culture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super fun. Natalie, thanks so much for hanging out. Super congratulations on your success with your podcast. I think this is going to be really helpful for people, totally inspiring as well. You have my wheels turning. And so, yeah, thanks for coming on and sharing it with us. Awesome. And there you have it, audio heads. Another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast is in the books. I hope you're leaving today feeling even more ready to amplify your voice and connect with your audience in meaningful ways. The adventure continues in our next episode with even more insights, strategies, and inspiration to help you along your own private podcasting journey. Of course, make sure to check out helloaudio.fm to start your own private podcast. And remember, you've got amazing content that needs to be heard. So let's turn the volume up. Until next time.